Hey everybody, we've got a fantastic video for you because we are out here in Normal, Illinois, where they build Rivian vehicles, the R1S and the R1T. And in this video, I'm going to give you a little behind the scenes on what Rivian development looks like. We're going to have a super unique opportunity to check out the plant, see how they build these vehicles, but also check out their test track and see where some of the development is done, which I'm super excited about. And this is a very first drive of something really special because, of course, the Rivian R1S and the truck version, the R1T, have been out for a couple of years now, but we've only driven the expensive 4-motor version, a motor that powers each of the 4 wheels. Well, today we're out here checking out the dual motor version, one in the back, one in the front. It's a little bit more affordable, it's got pretty impressive range, and it brings a lot of cool technology to the table. The 2-motor Rivian R1S and R1T do have less power than the 4-motor. So the 4-motor makes 835 horsepower, and the 2-motor comes in a couple of different variants. The base car makes 533 horsepower, and then there's a performance version which makes 665. The difference is not hardware, it's actually a software difference, which will cost you about $5,000 to upgrade from the 533 to the 665. There's a couple of other differences you need to know about. For example, 0 to 60 time. The slowest one's going to be about 4.5 seconds. The performance is going to be 3.5, and then the quad motor is 3 seconds according to Rivian. So clearly the dual motors are a little bit down on power, a little bit down on performance, but we're going to get them out on the road in a second and see how they perform. But first, let's go in depth with this new dual motor setup called the Enduro motor. We can get a look at how it's made and how it's put together. We are within the new Rivian assembly plant where they are building the Enduro powertrain, and there are really 3 components to this motor assembly, which, by the way, is the same mounting points as the 4-motor setup. So the inverter actually sits on top. Then the motor is integrated into this one-piece casing, and the motor is of course made up of the rotor and the stator, which are now oil-cooled. This is interesting. So this is the stator, and within this the rotor spins, and these are copper windings, but rather than having traditional windings, Rivian uses these little copper hairpins that are all welded together. There's 240 of them in the stator, and they all go together, and they're just these little strips of bent copper. So this is the inverter, and the inverter is a pretty simple device. It converts DC from the battery to AC that the motors can use to turn, and this is the heart of the inverter. It's called the power module. So here we've got the final product. You can see the differential assembly, and then of course the output to the wheels. Now this is interesting. So the hot oil from the stator and the rotor gets sent to this little heat exchanger, which then takes that heat and transfers it to the glycol cooling system of the vehicle to keep everything nice and cool. You can see there's another glycol loop there in the inverter just to keep everything nice and cool, but it's a really small unit, about the size of a carry-on, and it weighs about 60 pounds less than the quad motor setup, 60 front, 60 back, so about 120 pounds less than the 4-motor unit. So one of the really cool features about the dual motor R1T and R1S is there's a disconnect now, and they can actually disconnect the rear axle altogether, so at cruising speeds you're far more efficient. Now when you start off from a stop, you're always in all-wheel drive, and then when you're cruising along, let's say 40-50, right, the rear motor is going to disconnect. So I'm going to get up to about 45 and plant it. Let's see if we feel delay as it reconnects. Oh yeah, interesting. So there's just an ever slight delay, and then the rear axle starts feeding in that torque. But what's interesting about that is it's not like a slam in the back. So it's not like there's a jolt or anything. It's really smooth. Just a slight delay, almost like a teeny tiny bit of turbo lag, and off you go. If you get the performance version of the dual motor, you actually get a sport mode, which you don't get on the standard car or truck. And then if you get the quad motor, you get modes like the drift and the rally and the soft sand and the rock crawl, which you don't get on any of the dual motors. So you get those off-road programming. But we're going to try a launch in the sport. Now this is only 2 motors, only 665 horsepower, not 830. But let's see how it works. So come to a complete stop and just give it all the beans. Full throttle. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's pretty good. I mean, here's the thing, right? This is what I'm struggling with a little bit on these dual motor cars is That is so unbelievably quick. 0 to 60 in 3.5 seconds. Do you really need more by stepping up to the quad motor? Now, Rivian will tell you that the quad motor excels in off-road terrain, right? Because you get torque vectoring and you have individual control of all 4 motors, where this just uses traction control and like a brake lock differential system to distribute torque and wheel speed. But from an on-road standpoint, the performance dual motor 0 to 60 in 3.5 is amazing. The standard one 0 to 60 in 4. I mean, we're talking about a luxury pickup and SUV. You really need to go faster than 4 seconds 0 to 60? I mean, they'd probably say yes. I would probably say, well, probably no. All right, so we've jumped into a quad R1T now. This is the 4 motor with the 835 horsepower. And we're going to take it around and see if there's a noticeable acceleration difference between the dual and the quad. 2, 1, full throttle. All right, so I'll tell you, the initial kind of jolt of acceleration is a little more in the quad, but it's not as pronounced as I thought it would be compared to the dual motor performance. But it's that like 40 to 70 territory where the 830 horsepower just shoots you down the track. So you get the tunnel vision briefly in the dual motor, and then you get a lot more of it in the quad. So that's really going to be the difference. They're both going to be impressive. Look, the quad motor was the only option for a long time. Personally, I'm kind of just initial perspective, I would save my money and get the dual, maybe get the performance if I wanted to go really quick. But the quad motor is going to be for the folks that want the ultimate in Rivian performance, right? They want the ultimate wow factor from 0 to 60, and maybe they want the ultimate in off-road capability, which we're going to check out right now. And this is what do you call this? Mount Rivian? Mount Normal? Mount Normal. So this is a manufactured hill. This has got to be the highest point in Normal, Illinois. I think it probably is. So you're probably wondering, why do they have these tracks and facilities at the manufacturing plant? Well, I asked the team, and I guess they do a lot of their like initial development in Arizona and at their headquarters in California, and then they use these facilities around the factory. They pluck vehicles off the line, and they've got a buzz squeak rattle track that they run them through to see, you know, if there's any squeaks or quality issues they need to address. Pretty cool. So they've set up a cool little like off-road test area for us here. Now, every dual motor does come standard with the air suspension, and then there is an off-road group you can add, which gives you the tires and then some underbody protection as well. Now, we are in the all-terrain mode. We don't have the rock crawl, as we mentioned earlier, that you would get on the quad motor. And of course, I have a good feeling Rivian's not going to put us through anything that we get stuck on. Sorry about that, team. But this car also has a hydraulic sway bar system, so you can kind of disconnect the front sway bar altogether, even in a dual motor car, to give you that additional articulation when you go in all-terrain mode. You also jack up the air suspension to the highest possible ride height, that kind of thing. All right, so we got a little articulated section. Now, of course, 4-corner independent suspension. And we're gonna start nice and gently lifting some tires. It's amazing how level the body stays relative to the wheels. The 2-motor setup in the R1T and R1S is going to perform differently than the 4-motor off-road because, of course, the 4-motor has 1 motor per wheel, and you can distribute torque where it needs to go just by adding power. Well, the 2-motor is going to distribute torque by adding brakes. Now, the 2-motor has a open diff front and back, and then it can squeeze down on the brake caliper using traction control to distribute wheel speed where it needs to go. Now, Rivian says the torque vectoring is going to perform better off-road in the 4-motor setup than the 2-motor, but I did ask any plans to put limited slips or locking diffs in the 2-motor setup. They say not at this time. If you want to get the ultimate off-road machine, step up to the 4-motor quad setup. All right, pick up some tires here.
So there's that brake traction control working.
Mm-hmm. So we actually lifted up the left front and the right rear, and we were able to kind of squeeze our way through that without much difficulty. Now, what I do think is very interesting about Rivian is that even to this date, they are kind of the only players in town when it comes to an EV vehicle that's capable of off-road terrain, except for the Hummer. And I've had plenty of experience off-road in the Hummer, and let me tell you what, that's a little bit harrowing because you got 9,000 pounds pulling you in every direction. So I'm pretty confident in saying the most capable EV off-road, other than like a Wrangler 4xe, but that's not a true full electric. Yeah, pretty impressive. You know, the thing about air suspension is when you jack them up to the highest settings, oftentimes you end up like topping out the air suspension because you don't have that down travel. Okay, so a little stuck there, but just apply gentle throttle application. I actually like the tuning on the accelerator more on the dual motor than the quad because you get kind of that more natural wheel speed differential, right? It's not as artificial. Yeah. Now, I did have a chance to run the same course in the quad motor setup, and look, this course just simply isn't hard enough for me to really see a difference. The quad motor setup does have a lot of capability. In my opinion, it's still not as good as a true locking differential because the computer still needs to react to situations, and it's more of a reactive system than what I typically find in like a traditional old school four-wheel drive with locking diffs or even a limited slip. But what we need to do is get these two vehicles off-road out in Colorado, run them through the TFL slip test to see how they perform side by side so we know the true differences. Now, it is worth noting that the quad motor does have more off-road modes than the dual motor. So the dual motor has an all-terrain mode, which is great, but the quad motor adds a rally, a drift, a rock crawl, a soft sand setting as well for off-roading. So it'd be really cool to see what that means out in the real world when we can get these back to Colorado and test them out. So this is a very interesting configuration of R1T. So this is a dual motor setup, but with the brand new Max Pack battery. And in this configuration, with the aerodynamic focused wheels that have these little covers to help them slip through the air, this truck is rated at a whopping 410 miles of EPA range. Check that out, 410. Now, we're pretty close to availability on the Max Pack, is what I'm told here by the Rivian engineers, and then the standard pack is coming down the line a little bit after, but I mean, that's a lot of quoted range for a truck, any truck, regardless of the size and the shape profile. So this is a really attractive option. This is a dual motor, so it doesn't have the quad, but with the Max Pack, this is one to keep your eye on. But even the most basic R1 vehicle you can purchase still has all the same options as a fully loaded quad motor. And what I mean by that is you still get the wireless charging and the heated seats and the dual zone automatic climate control and the power front trunk and the leather everywhere and the, you know, you got the glass roof. So you don't miss any of the features by buying a dual motor vehicle. You still get the fantastically cool Rivian interior and the same screen and all the same functionality, ventilated seats. You just don't have the quad motor setup. All right, pop in the front trunk in the R1T. Glides open electrically, good amount of space in here. Lots of place to put things. Yeah, very, very useful front trunk in the R1T. Where's the little button? Come on, there it is. Glides on down. Visually, the dual motor and the quad motor Rivians have some cues to indicate what you're looking at. First of all, the brake calipers. So the brake calipers in the quad motor are yellow and in the dual motor are silver. Also badging, for example, like the badge on the back, the quad motor has a little yellow line and the dual motor doesn't have that little yellow accent piece. And then I am told that the performance over the standard dual motor is also going to have some visual cues, but those have not been announced yet. Let's talk about pricing, because that is the biggest news with the dual motor equipped R1T and R1S. Now currently, if you get the cheapest quad motor on the market, you're going to be paying about $87,000. The small battery dual motor is going on sale starting at $73,000. That's a difference of 14 grand. And depending on the configuration, if you can get this truck for under $80,000 and you of course apply with your taxes, you could be eligible for the $7,500 tax credit because the cap on SUVs and trucks is $80,000. This is a big deal, guys. It's a really, really, really important thing for the Rivian brand, and I think that certain vehicles qualify for that $7,500 tax credit because that is a big purchasing driver for a lot of folks. Now, of course, if you get the Max Pack, if you get the Performance Package, which adds about $5,000 to your vehicle, that's going to significantly drive up the price. But the entry-level truck starting at $73,000 is pretty impressive. Now, I'm kind of curious down the line, right? The $73,000 truck is still going to have all of the power goodies, the air suspension, the power front trunk. Are we going to see a more stripped down one coming down the line with steel springs, maybe a manual front trunk, to get that price even lower, to compete with the upcoming flood of EV trucks like the Silverado EV? Of course, you've got the Lightning, but the big one, which, well, we've seen testing now, is the Cybertruck, right? And that still is not on the market, right? We still don't have final idea of when that's going to hit the market, but we do know that the dual motor Rivians are in testing right now. The first customer deliveries to employees have already happened, so this truck should be just around the corner. Now the SUV, the R1S, there goes one right there, that's going to start closer to $78,000, so it's a slight price bump over the truck, but still a pretty significant price decrease over the quad motor setup. If you compare the 2-motor to the 4-motor side by side, apples to apples in terms of pricing, there's an $8,000 difference, which is very significant, at least if you go the base 2-motor to the quad motor setup. Now, the battery is an interesting story as well because we've all driven the large battery pack at this point. The Max Pack is brand new. That's going to be hitting showrooms here pretty shortly, and then the small pack is still a little bit down the ways. But even if you get the large pack, you can just barely squeak under that $80,000 tax credit threshold if you get the 2-motor setup, which you can't do with the 4-motor setup. Now this is a really cool facility. So that right there is the manufacturing plant in Normal, Illinois, and this is a delivery center. So if you buy an R1S or an R1T, you can elect to take delivery here at the plant, which is so unusual. I don't think there's any traditional manufacturers that let you do that. And this was an old Mitsubishi plant, right? And this was a engineering bay. And this plant section, the reason I'm focusing on it is because this is where they would drive cars in to drain fluids, do that kind of thing. But of course, Rivian, they don't need to do the same kind of fluid draining, so they went ahead and filled it up with plants. But it's a really cool center here. It's nicely renovated, looks really, really good. They got a little hangout section here. You can see your brand new R1S or R1T under the lights and then drive it home. So some facts about this facility in Normal, Illinois. This used to be an ex-Mitsubishi facility that was about 2.6 million square feet. Well, Rivian has expanded significantly, including this new wing, to build the new dual motor powertrain. And all in all, Rivian now has a 4 million square foot facility in Normal, Illinois that employs over 7,000 people through 3 shifts of workers, which is just incredible. So this is a really, really, really big facility that's easily on the same league as a lot of the major OEMs. And in case you're wondering about towing, the dual motor tows the same as a quad motor, which is pretty impressive. I mean, we're talking over 10,000 pounds. So guys, it's a little bit slower and it doesn't have the torque vectoring, but my initial impression off-road, it feels just as good, to be honest with you. Lots of ground clearance and a more affordable price. Seems like the dual motor is the way to go. Now we still need to test out the small LFP battery and really get this thing out in Colorado to see it performs. But a huge thank you to Rivian for having me out here, allowing me to check out the plant and test drive the first dual motor. As always, has been Tommy. We'll see you in the next video.